Get yours today. Hi, welcome to Darkwood Brew. I'm Eric Elmas, your host, and Darkwood Brew is that place where we combine ancient mystical Christian practices with modern interactive web technology, jazz, arts, biblical scholarship, and well, you never know exactly what's going to happen. In the late 1950s, the Ford Motor Company was following some of the very steps that we have outlined thus far in our series on creativity, about how to engage in the creative process through dreaming, hovering, and risking, those three stages we've covered so far. They dreamed a big dream. They dreamed not only of creating one new car, but a whole line of Edsels, 4 different models, 18 different trim types, and they'd hovered over that dream, really doing all the market research to figure out what the American public wanted in an automobile, refining it until they developed a prototype, a set of Edsels, and then they risked a lot of money, $400 million, that's well over $4 billion by today's standards, in cutting-edge production facilities, creating a whole series of exclusive Edsel dealerships clear across the country, all for a car the public had not yet even seen. It was even shipped to the dealerships under wraps. Lots of secrecy, but far be it from Ford to know that until the day that the car was unveiled, that their $400 million or $4 billion investment would be a complete flop. What happened? Well, I'll bet you Ford wishes they could have stepped into their Back to the Future DeLorean and come to Darkwood Brew to see this episode, because we're covering the 4th stage of the creative process, one that could have saved them a lot of money. What is that stage, and what does it have to do with following the spiritual path? Well, that's what we'll be exploring with our special guest throughout the series, Troy Bronsink. So looking forward to this episode, and Troy, and some special announcements ahead as well. But before we go any further, let's see what's happened thus far in the series.
These things, but don't hold them so tightly, 'cause what you hold so tightly, you no longer hold for me, but for you.
This week, Nicholas Obradovich is sharing the pneuma with us.
As for this worthless slave, throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth.
There's a type of love that is intended for all creation, and we're actually doing exactly what's been intended. We're listening to one another. We're participating in this.
Thank you for your perfect love poured out on me, casting out my fear. But I need you to turn up the pressure. I have only put my toes in that holy water.
Putting a halo on it. Hey, that looks kind of good, I think. You know? Yeah.
So hovering is kind of not like a helicopter mom that's anxious, but more hovering in a place of wholeness, of kind of what is this this gift I've been given, this opportunity, and how do I kind of box this opportunity and dig into it.
Great, great, thank you. Our Pneuma Divina this week comes to us from Acts 16, verses 6 through 15. The Pneuma Divina is our central scripture passage, and we'll hear it 4 times. This first time, Stephen Wells, a high school student and Darkwood brewer, shares this passage with us. So let's listen together.
They went through the region of Phrygia and Galatia, having been forbidden by the Holy Spirit to speak the word in Asia. When they had come opposite Mysia, they attempted to go into Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus did not allow them. So, passing by Mysia, they went down to Troas. During the night, Paul had a vision. There stood a man of Macedonia, pleading with him and saying, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." When he had seen the vision, we immediately tried to cross over to Macedonia, being convinced that God had called us to proclaim the good news to them. We set sail from Troas and took a straight course to Samothrace, the following day to Neapolis, and from there to Philippi, which is a leading city of the district of Macedonia and a Roman colony. We remained in this Macedonia and a Roman colony. We remained in this city for some days. On the Sabbath day, we went outside the gate by the river, where we supposed there was a place of prayer. And we sat down and spoke to the women who had gathered there. A certain woman named Lydia, a worshipper of God, was listening to us. She was from the city of Thyatira, and a dealer in a purple cloth. The Lord opened her heart to listen eagerly to what was said by Paul. When she and her household were baptized, she urged us, saying, "If you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come and stay at my home." And she prevailed upon us.
I'm duly impressed that he could read all those places and names.
Those place names. That's
Pronounce
right.
them all properly.
Excellent.
That
Well,
was really
probably
good.
his Greek scholarship that did it.
Oh, I'm sure that's what it was, yeah.
That passage, we'll be hearing it 3 other times later in the episode, but that actually, there's something that going on in that passage that really models that 4th step in the creative process that we'll be dealing with. But it comes from Paul's second missionary journey across what's now modern-day Turkey, and he kind of thought it was supposed to just kind of take place there, but apparently the Holy Spirit thought otherwise.
A lot of exercise involved in that, from what I hear.
Yeah, that's right. His journey only lasted him a couple of years longer than he thought it would, and thousands of miles walking, but we'll get to that a little later. Yeah. So what was our question of the week this week?
Well, it has to do with conversational reality, which I'm sure Paul came across quite a bit. But the question of the week is, it's been said that reality is conversational. What does this mean to you? And our first response came from Joelle Walters. And she says, I think it means reality is fluid. It's an exchange between us, our environment, the people we meet. Our lives proceed simultaneously with others. So it is something where it's outside of just us, but it's a dual conversation. It's a conversation that we have with all of life. And so it's not just an individual journey.
Yeah, it's interesting the reality being a two-way street.
Yeah.
A lot of times we don't think about it being two-way. Yeah.
Right. And then, let's see. Darren Anderson says, to me, it refers to reality is found in relationships with one another that affect, move, and transform each person involved. So we have not only the conversation between the two, but how it's transformative in how we act and how we move in the world and have our being. Sean Strickland answered, well, I think that everyone has a different perception of reality, while God has every single type of perception of reality, which is really kind of interesting. It's like each individual holds like a piece or a perception of it, but God has the entirety of the wholeness kind of in mind, which is an interesting discussion. And John Dorhauer says, it suggests to me that perceptions matter. We discover an open dialogue that we all see the world differently. Close down dialogue, and we reduce our knowledge to only that which we think we know. Open up dialogue and tightly held assumptions about what we thought was real give us opportunities to experience life, truth, and reality very differently.
So it seems like there's both of those kind of deal with this interesting kind of almost quantum field of reality, where you quantum mechanics, a lot of they're noticed that just the power of observation somehow changes the data. that's like, what's going on there?
Well, it's that community speak too. By getting it out and being in conversation with each other, it actually creates the reality as it forms in that conversation, which I think is kind of interesting too. Charlene answers, because each of us understand reality in light of our past experience, our beliefs, prejudices, and understanding. Reality is a result fluid and highly influenced by those things, therefore somewhat individual. While some individuals and groups may see reality similarly, if you dig a little, there will be at least minor differences. So we had some where you're creating reality within the conversation, as well as bringing your own personal response to it that feeds into that reality that's being
so there's a creating piece to reality, and also there's being created by reality, and kind of this feedback.
And it's not just, you know, our voice or yours and my voice together, or even yours, mine, and the whole ecosystem kind of voice together, but God's involved in that as well. So that conversation is way more than just one or two people. It's an entire life coming into being as we speak it. So
You know, the poet
really nice.
David White talks about conversational reality. In fact, that's where we kind of lifted the term from. White, W-H-Y-T-E. And I love one of his statements about that we have to, in order to kind of live a healthy life, we need to cultivate a relationship, a vital relationship with the unknown, to be open to new data that comes in from God, from the world, and so forth. And because if we don't cultivate a healthy relationship with the unknown, all we're really doing is editing reality in light of whatever paradigms we've been holding on to, or whatever assumptions we'd previously held before. So we just simply kind of edit anything that contradicts it out.
So you're redoing it, something that you've already done before. There's no newness or new possibilities involved in any of that. It's just kind of shuffling what you already know.
Yeah, yeah.
Scott calls that, what is that, realigning chairs on the Titanic or something like that.
Scott, your husband, Scott?
Yeah, my husband.
Great.
So yeah, it's good. It's recognizing the conversation of reality is something that then gets us in the mood, I think, to get to this next step of creativity where we're listening. Because conversation is
she had the drum roll. We hadn't revealed that yet.
Sorry. Spoiler alert.
No, that's right. No, the fourth step, the creative process. We've got dreaming, we've got hovering, we've got risking. But then a lot of times once people risk and put it out there, they think, okay, my work's over, I'm just going to go for it now. But there's actually a critical component. It's continuing to listen once you've put that, taken the risk, put that out there. And we'll get into that.
If I were listening, I would have known that. Sorry about that.
Well, one reality you can really help us affect, we have a reality that will come to an end no matter how much we try to recreate that reality or not. On December 31st, we have a $25,000 matching grant, and your donations really help. We had some good activity last week, but every dollar is matched dollar for dollar. We're just a little over $3,000 away from actually hitting that goal, and that would be really, really helpful to us. Keeps us on coming out every week to you. So appreciate your support. And if you can hit that donate button and make either a one-time gift or a weekly or monthly gift, that's very much appreciated. Well, Matt, you want to introduce the band? Then you also have a little surprise up your sleeve, I understand.
Yeah, actually we do. Here's the fellas in the band: Matt Amandus on the keyboards, Carlos Figueroa on the drums, and Steve Gomez on the bass. And later we're going to bring out Miss Carol Rogers on a brand new Chuck Moronic tune entitled "Honey from the Rock." But we understand that Troy had kind of a big day yesterday, so we want to give him a little salute.
All right. Well, Troy,
Happy birthday, Troy.
we salute you. See, we even got this cake, which Chris and I are going to do you the favor of eating right in front of you. This is a great carrot cake
really love this,
that one of our Darkwood Brew personnel spent all day baking, I think. Right? Yeah. And it looks pretty fabulous. It's cream cheese frosting. They made sure of that.
And we made sure this was your favorite cake, so we could eat it for you.
All right.
Oh my God.
So, so Troy, while we're eating your cake, we're going to go to a viewer from Massachusetts who was reflecting on the fourth exercise from your book about listening, where you suggest that people, in order to kind of get into that process, take a listening walk. And this is what she came up with.
We had a frost this morning. As I drove to work, I could see it in several spots, tiny diamonds sparkling in the rising sun. As I came upon the lake, the scene was breathtaking. The lake was covered in a fog with the sun above it. I pulled over and rolled down my window. A single Canada goose honked its displeasure at my presence. I was so mesmerized by the view, I wanted to try to capture it on my camera phone to remind me of this moment. The fog was lifting off the lake like hundreds of spirit dancers, swaying, spinning, all with their arms lifted in praise to God. I tried to take a picture and realized that I was looking toward the sun and I couldn't see. So I blindly moved my camera slowly, taking several pictures that I really had no idea what they would look like. My heart was singing praises, and I felt the presence of God in His glorious creation. The words from Isaiah filled my spirit. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord will shine upon you. When I got to my office, I eagerly looked at the pictures. They were so amazing. I wanted to share them.
Troy, I wish I could share this birthday cake with you, but thanks for having a birthday, man.
Yeah. Just doesn't feel fair.
So that was Gina Lynch reflecting on that from First Congregational Church in Brimfield, Massachusetts. That was
awesome.
Nice exercise to go out on a listening walk where you're actually paying attention to your surroundings and letting them kind of feed back into you. I mean, that's one of the things that actually David White, when he talks about conversational reality, talks a lot about paying attention to the whole world, that the whole world is really very much seeks a place within you. It kind of, it triggers certain voices within that you kind of say yes when they need to say yes in response to the world, that kind of help us kind of ferret out our path through. So life isn't just simply about kind of downloading something directly and just marching forward, but it's actually paying attention to the world and the way the world is speaking to you and generating its own conversation within you. Yeah,
I mean, wherever you're sitting right now, I almost think it would be helpful to just kind of think about the space you're in. Some of you might be eating cake, other of us might not eat cake. But if you, I'm sitting in the side of my office. I've got some artwork behind me that some friends put together, but I'm looking at the other side where my desk is covered with tons of papers and things that I haven't cleaned up yet from this morning and the past week. And I can see out the window folks coming into a youth group program at my church. And maybe you can kind of look around the space you're in, whether you're watching this on a video later or in the moment that you're in. And what does it mean to be in this space? What are the colors that come to mind, and the smells and the sights? The sounds. I think that we think that God a lot of times isn't sensorily. There's not a sensual or sensitive aspect to God, where God actually senses and perceives and relates to what God is creating. So you have a potter that sits there at a wheel spinning clay and curving it and watching it, the vessel kind of develop within her hands. How much interplay is there between what God is making and that dynamic relationship with the thing God is creating, whether it's you or me or the world in which we live? And there can be a lot of different philosophies around that, but in our text we have these stories of Abraham arguing with God, and there's this kind of interplay when Abraham is saying, "Don't destroy Sodom," and they go back and forth and say, "Well, what do we do here?" And then you have God hearing the cry of the children of Israel, primarily these women crying out during Egyptian oppression, and this becomes this kind of activator, and now God is in play. And you can't read the beginning of Exodus without realizing that the cry activated this entire interplay. And there's this whole process where there's a dialogue. I think a lot of times when we take these risks, we begin to self-identify with the risk so much that it becomes kind of centers on our own ego, our own project, our own sense of who God is. And so we're afraid to listen for what else it could be. You've never seen everything is one of those great kind of statements. You've never seen everything. Great album by Bruce Cockburn. But what does it mean to recognize I'm noticing God at work in the world, or I'm noticing generative life in these relationships I have with other people, or the things I'm building and designing. But what else is there to notice? So the Edsel story is a great one, right? The kind of failure of design thinking there. An analog or another example of that would be I've mentioned a couple times IDEO. David Kelly and Tim Brown and others who formed this design thinking firm. And I was recently watching some video dialogue with David Kelly, and he was talking about the design process for the mouse. That now we have a mouse on everything. I've got it built into my computer, but Steve Jobs commissioned IDEO to design this thing that he said he wants it to work with the screen, and they were building it, and they had to get this kind of feedback from the users about that experience, and they kept refining it. And I think a lot of times when we are building projects as a church, or just simply as a singer-songwriter and artist, if you aren't seeing how does this play in the wider society with the folks we're working with, you can have this huge miss, and the Etzel's this great example of this. Yeah, I think one of the things that's intriguing about the Etzel is that they had actually deliberately left the public out of the conversation. I mean, they did all their market research, so they were truly paying attention to something the public wanted. But then once they developed their prototype, it was all secret, so nobody could actually see it or give feedback to it, so that when it was released, some of the key features of the Edsel that they thought were like the cat's meow, for instance, the push button automatic shift on the middle of the steering wheel. When the real users were driving the car, what they were finding was it was downright dangerous. They would go to honk the horn and oh, it's not there. They'd accidentally shift their car out of gear, things like this. Or even the design of that front piece, it reminded a lot of people of a horse collar, or even worse, a toilet seat. Some people called it an Oldsmobile sucking lemons. So once those images are in your mind, they're kind of hard to get out. But if they would have taken that prototype and done what every car manufacturer ever since then has done, which is deliberately solicit public feedback, they could have eliminated a lot of those what became truly design flaws, not simply design innovations. David Kelly makes this interesting comparison. He calls it empathy, and he talks about the Cleveland Clinic is this renowned hospital center in northern Ohio, and they put together this video talking with all the different people in a hospital during the day. And they had the little thought bubbles across their head of just learned I'm 5 years free of cancer. And the other one was divorced. There's a janitor who goes by, going on vacation for the first time in 2 years. And then there's, somebody else still getting bad news about my child's illness, And how is it that all of these factors, what people are feeling and sensing, are information for all of us to discern what we're doing in the world. So that sense of that larger whole, and how do we, in a sense, the risk was that kind of diving in and saying, I will try something, and I'm going to, and as much as I need to identify with it to get it done, I'm going to leverage all my gifts and passions towards writing this book. But then there's a process where then it's handed back to a wider collective that has to interact with it, and you learn from that. wider collection of editors and everybody else who can begin to give some feedback.
Yeah, exactly. A finished book isn't just simply the author writing and then it going out into the world. It's editors. It's also if a writer is a lot of writers, a lot of us have it read by a lot of people before it ever makes it across the printing press. And yeah, it's part of that listening. You're right. And I think one of the problems with the Edsel is actually kind of serves as an uncomfortable parallel to the spiritual path too, in the sense that, I mean, they were just dead certain they knew what the public wanted. I mean, they'd honestly done more market research than most auto manufacturers had done. So they were just so positive they knew what we wanted, and what would be good for us. Then that's when they shut off the listening. And it seems like a lot of times people of faith, if you feel like you've received a word from the Lord, go in this direction, or take this job, or do this thing, to then sense going on a different path that might be taken in light of new information, kind of starts to feel to people like, well, they're letting God down, or they're disobedient to God, or think of the people who are just absolutely certain they know what God wants. Oftentimes they just are the last people to listen to other people, or even then to listen for further information from the Spirit.
Yeah, and I think in today's society too, because of the instantaneous access to supporting facts, to anything we want to know, I can dial it up immediately and find out a supporting fact to this, that we quit listening for contradictory facts or complementary facts that would widen our perspective. So you look at Capitol Hill, and that's symptomatic of really our society. In a lot of ways, it's so easy. We actually form these disciplines and practices of reinforcing ourselves instead of disciplines and practices of hearing and accounting for the other and for kind of a responsive empathy, if you will. Even though we're separate, you don't share that person's pain. You don't ever know exactly what another feels. But they can reveal those things, and it can open up your own perspective to the bigger whole. There's I told this story, I think, the first week of Dan Rather interviewing Mother Teresa. And he spends this whole time with her going through Calcutta and looking at her ministry of seeing Christ in the suffering, right, in those who are suffering, and really serving all of these folks with a sense that she's serving God. And then he sits down with her and says, in your prayer life, tell me about this, and she has this kind of coy grin that we've come to know, kind of characteristic of Mother Teresa. And he says, what are the words you say when you pray? Thinking that we'd kind of get like the prayer of Mother Teresa, like the prayer of St. Francis, and we'd know what to say. And she leans in and she says, I don't say anything, I just listen. So Dan, rather, trying to get a little closer, like, can we get some real meat out of this, leans in and he says, well, what does God say? And she said, he just listens too.
Yeah. I'm not sure if anybody's ever found the actual source of that story or not, but it certainly rings true to Mother Teresa. That sense, yeah. That sense we need to get still and quiet, and there's something in that stillness that produces where it actually, if you can get truly still, find that place within yourself where you're not reacting to anything, you're not afraid of anything, you're not judging anything, nor are you being judged by anything or anyone, including God. You can find that, all of us, if we search around inside ourselves, we can find that place of just absolute stillness and peace. And oftentimes if we can get quiet and just listen in that place, we find awarenesses welling up within us that seem to quite frequently be indicators of where our soul and God are in connection, and where the flow of our life is trying to go. And it seems like oftentimes when we get so we think that we've got that word, and then we just rush off and do it, we forget to continue to listen like that, because sometimes we have to kind of go off in a certain direction, and we're meant to take a right-hand turn, but we were thinking we're supposed to go straight the whole time. But if we're not listening, we can't even have seen that right-hand turn unless we got out a ways, heading straight. And so oftentimes it seems like that process of listening, unless we're really attentive to that, we miss those right turns and the left turns and so forth, where the Spirit is honestly trying to get us to change course a bit.
No, that's a good word. Absolutely.
Well, we're going to transition into our Pneuma reading, we're going to hear the passage you heard up front 3 more times, but in a more contemplative, listening sense this time. You're going to hear the passage, and the first time you hear it, simply take a minute or so to you find that word or phrase that kind of lifts itself off of the page for you or the screen. And if you find that word or phrase that has stuck in your mind, then start to think about every situation in your life that you can think of that engages that word or phrase in some way. That's one of the ways we actually kind of get down into the well of ourselves, get down into those waters that we can't actually see into directly. But if we'll begin to use a creative process like this, insights tend to well up. So the first reading, simply look for that word or that phrase. And you may want to even close your eyes or look at the screen as the text goes by.
They went through the region of Phrygia and Galatia, having been forbidden by the Holy Spirit to speak the word in Asia. When they had come opposite Mysia, they attempted to go to Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus did not allow them. So passing by Mysia, they went down to Troas. During the night, Paul had a vision. There stood a man of Macedonia pleading with him and saying, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." When he had seen the vision, we immediately tried to cross over to Macedonia, being convinced that God had called us to proclaim the good news to them. We set sail from Troas and took a straight course to Samothrace, the following day to Neapolis, and from there to Philippi, which is a leading city of the district of Macedonia and a Roman colony. We remained in this city for some days. On the Sabbath day, we went outside the gate by the river, where we supposed there was a place of prayer. And we sat down and spoke to the woman who had gathered there. A certain woman named Lydia, a worshiper of God, was listening to us. She was from the city of Thyatira and a dealer in purple cloth. The Lord opened her heart to listen eagerly to what was said by Paul. Then she and her household were baptized. She urged us, saying, "If you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come and stay at my home." And she prevailed upon us.
Now, this next time you hear the passage read, take that word or that phrase that you identified in the first reading and hold it up next to a situation right now where you are feeling like you are pushing water uphill, like you're trying to get something to go where it's not naturally meant to go.
They went through the region of Phrygia and Galatia, having been forbidden by the Holy Spirit to speak the word in Asia. When they had come opposite Mysia, they attempted to go to Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus did not allow them. So, passing by Mysia, they went down to Troas. During the night, Paul had a vision. There stood a man of Macedonia pleading with him and saying, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." When he had seen the vision, we immediately tried to cross over to Macedonia, being convinced that God had called us to proclaim the good news to them. We set sail from Troas and took a straight course to Samothrace, the following day to Neapolis, and from there to Philippi, which is a leading city in the district of Macedonia and a Roman colony. We remained in this city for some days. On the Sabbath day, we went outside the gate by the river, where we supposed there was a place of prayer, and we sat down and spoke to the women who had gathered there. A certain woman named Lydia, a worshiper of God, was listening to us. She was from the city of Thyatira and a dealer in purple cloth. The Lord opened her heart to listen eagerly to what was said by Paul. When she and her household were baptized, she urged us, saying, "If you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come and stay at my home." And she prevailed upon us.
This final pass through the passage, we invite you either to continue that conversation you started in the last reading, or simply do the Mother Teresa thing. Just simply listen to God listening. Simply rest in the presence.
They went through the region of Phrygia and Galatia, having been forbidden by the Holy Spirit to speak the word in Asia. When they had come opposite Mysia, they attempted to go to Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus did not allow them. So passing by Mysia, they went down to Troas. During the night, Paul had a vision. There stood a man of Macedonia pleading with him and saying, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." When he had seen the vision, we immediately tried to cross over to Macedonia, being convinced that God had called us to proclaim the good news to them. We set sail from Troas and took a straight course to Samothrace, the following day to Neapolis, and from there to Philippi, which is a leading city of the district of Macedonia and a Roman colony. We remained in this city for some days. On the Sabbath day, we went outside the gate by the river, where we supposed there was a place of prayer, and we sat down and spoke to the women who had gathered there. A certain woman named Lydia, a worshiper of God, was listening to us. She was from the city of Thyatira and a dealer in purple cloth. The Lord opened her heart to listen eagerly to what was said by Paul. When she and her household were baptized, she urged us, saying, "If you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come and stay at my home. And she prevailed upon us.
Well, I invite you to continue to rest in that presence or continue the conversation as we go to our band for the musical feature. And when we come back, we'll take your questions or comments of Troy or myself. Feel free to log them in on live chat and in the coffee house. Tracy will take that. And we'll look forward to exploring this passage and listening shortly.
distress, you called, I answered you. In distress, you called, I answered you. But the people didn't listen to me. At the waters of Meribah, I tested you. At the waters of Meribah, I tested you. At the waters of Meribah, I tested you. But the people wouldn't listen to me. I am the one who brought you from Egypt. I am the one who brought brought you from Egypt. I am the one who brought you from Egypt. But the people didn't listen to me. Those who hate the Lord will tremble. Those who hate the Lord will tremble. Those who hate the Lord will tremble, 'cause the people didn't listen to me. Their foes. In a moment I would subdue their foes. In a moment I would subdue their foes. But the people didn't listen to me. Israel I would feed with the finest wheat. Israel I would feed with the finest wheat. Israel I would feed with the finest wheat and satisfy them with honey from the rock. With honey from the rock. Honey from the rock. With honey from the rock. Honey from the rock of ages. Honey from the rock.
Little listening, little looping. Yeah, it's good, good. Well, hey, before we get to Troy, I want to put up a couple of visuals on the screen. One is, I think, a good illustration of the spiritual path. We tend to think of the path, you know, when we hear a word from the Lord, so to speak, you know, that we're meant to move from point A to point B in some sort of straight line, but that's not the way life works. That's not even how Jesus' path worked. It looks more like this. Oftentimes, our lives are surrounded by a physical geography, but there's also a geography that's really invisible to the naked eye. It's part of our emotional landscape, it's part of our spiritual landscape, psychological landscape, it's a part of our relational landscape, and perhaps even almost like a quantum landscape of potentialities. And those kind of things they have to do. They're always shifting the landscape. There are dead ends in our path. There are places where if we go a certain direction, it will hurt us or harm us. There are areas that really bring us alive fully if we head in a certain direction. There are times we hit up against a brick wall or seem like we're climbing uphill. So other times when we're not. But our path tends to follow, you know, the path the Spirit wants us to follow tends to be actually a path of least resistance through that geography that's ever changing, and that's why logic itself and reason that can help us, but they can't get us the whole way there. We have to listen for that flow. Where is that flow taking us? And to say that it's taking us to the path of least resistance doesn't mean it's taking on an easy path necessarily. Sometimes the path of least resistance is like straight down the mountain and in a raging river, you know, kind of thing, scary even. But other times it's just simply gently meandering around the terrain of our lives. We always have the free will to choose wherever we want to wander on that geography, but there are ways that lead closer to our destination or further along our course than others. Paul seems to be following such a path when he goes on his second missionary journey. We hear about the Spirit preventing him from going one place and another and so forth. He's kind of wandering around. If you put that first map up, you see a map of his whole second missionary journey there. He thought it was going to be restricted mostly to the area of to the right, whereas modern-day Turkey. He gets to Iconium, and he thinks he's going to head to Ephesus in Asia Minor, right across the way. If you put up that second slide, you'll see those 2 points. There's Iconium and there's Ephesus, but the Spirit says no, and he ends up going through Galatia and Phrygia and on he tries to go to Bithynia up to the north, but no, he's going to go to Troas, and so on. The Spirit seems to be kind of guiding him through these paths of least resistance, and perhaps you could also say paths of greatest opportunity for him as he goes along the way. But hence the need constantly to be listening. Sometimes you can't see the direction you're even meant to go right away unless you get out there following a certain path for certain ways, and then a door opens, or it's that the timing is right. The geography it lends itself to making a turn, and you make that turn. Well, we're going to come back to Troy Bronsink and more about listening and this passage in particular. Troy, was there a word or phrase that leapt off the page for you in this passage?
Yeah, I was surprised that the words forbidden and not allowed both kind of were triggers for me. I was talking about it on the chat how I think because of various issues with authority or whatever, you don't really like hearing the words forbidden or not allowed. And so we tend to be really resistant with these things that aren't conspiring with us. And there's actually a lot of freedom to just go, they aren't going to conspire with us. I'm just going to drop them. That image you showed of the meandering serpentine river reminds me of the work of Andrew Goldsworthy, who's a naturalist, art installation worker, and he'll create these things in nature, and he has to deal with nature's limits. So there's the movie. Rivers and Tides.
Yes.
In there, he talks about working. It shows him building this stone piece, and you guys should check it out. It's on Netflix. I think you can stream it for free. Yeah. So, but it goes to this whole story of him building these pieces, and then watching the stones fall. And he does it 3 or 4 times. I mentioned it actually in the book. And at a certain point, the 4th time it falls, you just have like this. Oh my gosh, are you serious? What a tragic way of doing art. Like, it never worked, And then he says this thing, he talks about, I won't quote it exactly, but it was at each level I built a deeper relationship with the stones, understanding what they could hold and couldn't hold. And I don't know, it goes even around to the jazz band and the sampling of those things, but then the work of listening to each other. Like, life is a lot more like Goldsworthy's art and a lot more like jazz, in that you have to listen, and things happen as you listen. But if you hear words like forbidden and not allowed, and that creates all this resistance in you, you can't really move into this new space. And so that kind of freedom that Paul must have felt to go, all right, I guess that's not it.
Yeah, it's got to take a lot of trust, I think, because none of us really react against, like, I forbid you to murder somebody. Okay, well, all right, well, thank you for forbidding that. Thank you for forbidding other people from murdering me, by the way, as well. That's also nice. We react when we suspect that what we're being forbidden from or blocked from is really good for us, better for us than where we're going. I think that's where Paul's kind of deep experience of continual listening. The phrase that stumped out for me was that once they get to Philippi, they find a place where they suppose that prayer took place. Paul has always taken that time to really kind of ask, am I still going the right direction? I'm going to keep going in this direction until you make it clear to me that I need to make a turn. But I'm not going to make a turn unless you make it clear to me. So I'm going to keep clearing this up with you, because he's known from his experience that if he follows that flow in his world, that it actually flows well for him. Even when life gets, on the surface, it would seem very difficult. He's beaten up in cities and so forth, and yet he keeps doing the work that seems to be bringing him alive, indicating his flow, and then what happens within the world, as a result. pretty amazing. You've talked about before in your book also about the community aspect of listening. What can you say about the role of other people in the listening process?
We were doing work in Atlanta around community development in Southwest Atlanta, and I showed up in the middle of a project that was clearly a bigger one than me, and I just was one of the players in this. But one of the challenges was we had folks that were low-income folks who were like retirees from blue-collar, low-income jobs, and then you had folks that were transitional on public subsidies, and then you had young creatives, and we were trying to discern together collectively what's right for our neighborhood. And if anybody from Southwest Atlanta tunes in at some point or pulls this in, they'll admit that it's never easy, and it's still not arrived anywhere necessarily. But one of the biggest struggles is how do those different groups listen to one another? And there was a real gift in the work of one person in particular. Otto Scharmer talks about Theory U, this process of getting from A to B, not with a straight line, but going down, kind of like the images you had of Paul, where there's kind of these meandering ways. And you have to go down this level from, instead of going straight from A to B, you have to let go of your own pride. You have to let go of your own prejudices. You have to let go of your own ideologies. And then when you're down here in this bottom of the U, there's this place of trust. So if everybody else in the room is admitting those, confessing them, then you can discern something and move into places of action on that discernment. Because the other half of discernment is actively implementing what you've discerned. And that takes that same kind of trust, which the jazz band gave a great example of this, right? There's this sense of you're building it, but then you do deliver it, and there's the dynamics that take place in there.
Yeah. Speaking of the band, we have a question from one of the band members for you right now, from Carol Rogers.
I've been introduced, and I'm so grateful for you, Troy. You're being a musician, you're being a thinker, a believer. I have a question for you. As musicians, two verbs are very important to us: hear and listen. You give me something to hear, I'm going to hear it, and listening for me is deeper. Is there a significant difference when we approach God, when we are endeavoring to hear His voice? Can you expound on that at all, please?
Wow, the difference between hearing and listening. I mean, there's the old active listening stuff that was introduced to me early in couples therapy, right? Do you listen through what somebody's saying and hear what and repeat to them, but actively be engaged? But I think there is a difference where hearing is just sounds and listening is kind of creating patterns, or not discerning patterns, really. And so. Yeah, I mean, you can. I was at a friend's house this morning listening to Neil Young, like a really old album, and we were talking about some of the patterns and the vocal work and that kind of stuff. And you're not just hearing it; you're listening through it. So, what does it mean to do that with God? I mean, the mystics do this as good as any, in that you leave this mysterious space for what else might God be saying, and it's kind of an openness and a freedom to hear again. And your song keyed on this perfectly, because over and over the call to Israel, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one God," and all these interesting invitations to hear. It is more than just hearing with our ears, but it's listening with our whole selves. I think Lydia shows this kind of place. Like what I remember seeing some of the text. There was like she was opened and then available and able to listen eagerly. And what also intrigued me, and maybe this would fit what you were asking, Carol, too, was that Lydia's response to listening eagerly was an opening response, a response of hospitality. Will you be my guest? And I think, in a sense, our relationship to great art is an opening and an invitation for that to shape and affect us. And that's definitely true in community work or in other relationships, and clearly in our discernment work with God. Are we allowing God to affect our notions of God, and in that sense, change our listening habits?
Exactly that. How can then we, as believers in the Lord, improve our ability to listen to the Lord and to be changed by the power of his word and everything that he says to us instead of just hearing. Can you give some guideline on that, please?
You might have more to say on that than I do. I don't know. There's two practices that I think are important ones, and I think we've practiced them in some ways today. One is centering prayer, like a real silencing place where you notice the distractions and you dismiss them, not as enemies or as things to be as resistance that you're upset with, but as these distractions come in places of silent and meditation, you simply acknowledge them and then dismiss them so that your mind is able to be more aware of those resistances that come up within us. I think that's a really important practice. Another is wonder. I think I've keyed on this before, but the meditation that you began with, the woman in New England walking out and reflecting on the water there and sitting with that's based on the meditation in the book that I learned from a photographer. Reading from a photographer who would have this real Zen practice. He would actually go and seek out a tree and sit at the foot of that tree and invite the tree to tell its story to him. Now, this really sounds bizarro unless you're in this process of saying, unless I do that, I'm totaling who this tree is and I have nothing more to learn about it. And I just need to get a really good shot at it. But at a certain point, you can sit in relationship with those things. I mean, the psalmists are filled with this. The heavens cry out. The trees will clap their hands. This notion that there is a song in creation and in the environment around us. And listening for that song and allowing it to widen our notion of what else is being said. So the photographer can actually sit and meditate at that tree, asking, what else can I hear? And I think that really is like your Pneuma Divina practice. I think the two inform each other. Being able to hear and understand creation enables us to hear and understand other creatures, like the people in the room with you, the people you've got to make a life with, and enables you to hear these words that are living and active in our scriptures.
Yeah. That's good stuff. Yeah, remind me of actually this listening to trees is not so bizarre in my world. Anyway, it's not that the trees physically talk, but I actually do a lot of walking meditation where I'm looking and deliberately kind of entering into conversation with the environment around me. I remember being in Bend, Oregon about a year ago, and I was quite anxious I was seeing this convergence that's going on in Christianity right now, which is terribly exciting to me, and it fills me with incredible hope. These post-evangelicals and post-liberal progressives kind of finding each other out in the wilderness at long last and just having a terrific time together. And I just kept asking you, what is it that I can do to help blow on the fire, of this movement and get it really going? And I was just simply looking at my surroundings and paying attention to what jumped out, what image from my surroundings jumped out. And this tree kind of really held my attention, and so I stopped and I listened. I just kind of asked, what is it about this tree that piqued my attention, kind of like the Pneuma Divina? What's the word or phrase? And as I looked at the tree, I noticed that it's this huge a cedar tree, and there was a little bird feeder that had been nailed onto the side of it. And suddenly the thought hit me that the convergence that's happening is like the great tree, and those of us who might want to be with that and helping it, we're little more than just a birdhouse, on the side of the tree. I mean, we can say we want to help the tree grow, but the tree is going to be is really attached to forces that are way beyond any one of us to affect. We might be able to defecate around the tree and create a little fertilizer or stuff like that, but there's really not a lot we can do that's going to actually make that tree grow. What we can do is bear witness to the existence of the tree. Help other people say, see that tree? Right there. And by the way, you want to put a birdhouse here too. And so the tree never spoke to me, but the tree really spoke to me. It put together the thoughts that in my gut that were kind of confused, and put them together in a certain way that spoke. I think a word for the Lord, at that time. Well, Troy, it's been great to have you on once again, and thanks, and once again, happy birthday. Thanks for the cake. And we'll look forward to seeing you next week to talk about the next piece of that creative process, which you call reintegration. Once you've listened, you've got to do something with that listening. And then the following week, the final week of our series, we're looking forward to having you right here in the studio with us, and we'll be talking about the 6th stage and hearing some good music, too.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Yeah. Maybe I can get some cake then. I don't know. Is it like wedding
There
cake?
we
You'll
go.
freeze it?
There we go. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks. Well, one of the things, if you'll go back and look at the passage we covered tonight in Acts 16, you'll find there's a curious, if you're listening to the passage really carefully, you'll find that there's a change of wording from they to we. It's talking about they did this, they did this, they did this, and they hit Troas, the place on the eastern coast of modern-day Turkey, and then suddenly it says, and now we did this, we did this, we did this. What would change the they to we? That appears to be where Paul met up for the first time with a particular person named Luke. Luke was the writer of the book of Acts, and there's a gospel, I think, that might have been called by his name too, right? Luke would become Paul's most precious and beloved and trusted traveling companion for the rest of his days. Luke probably even would be responsible for saving Paul's life at times. Paul had some frequent need of medical attention, and Luke was a physician. And Luke was he wrote some of the most important writings of the New Testament. Paul never would have met Luke, and probably never even would have made it to Greece. It was probably Luke actually who suggested Greece, that was then confirmed in a dream. Probably none of this would have happened had he not met Luke, and yet his plan in his second missionary journey was not to go anywhere close to Troas. He thought he was headed to Ephesus, but because he kept listening, kept following, that zigzag path around, following the Spirit wherever that path of least resistance was, the flow of his life went, the Spirit was able to get him clear across the continent to find the one person he really, really needed. And not just Paul, but all of us really needed. I think that points out a key piece of this whole spiritual path. Jesus talks about he's the vine and we are the branches. The branch doesn't need to worry about the fruits. What is it? What's the product of all our listening and our creative thinking? What's actually being produced from it? What the branch needs to pay most attention to is, am I connected to the vine? And the vine will take care of whatever fruit that is, but are we connected to the vine? So as Paul is wandering around Turkey wondering, what the heck am I doing? I thought I was supposed to go to Ephesus, and then I thought I was supposed to go to Bithynia and all this. He can't worry about why it is happening. He just needs to worry about staying connected to the vine. I think this meal that we celebrate at the end of Darkwood Brew every week brings that full circle, to the vine itself. Jesus practiced what he preached. If you happen to have bread or wine or juice and crackers or other elements you'd like to share with us tonight, we invite you to participate with us in the ritual of communion. But we are reminded that Jesus was probably called into places in his own zigzag path towards his destination that he never would have anticipated. God leading him throughout his own spiritual geography, and he could not worry about where would it all end or what would it all amount to. He just simply needed to worry about, am I connected to God? Am I following where that path, that flow is taking me? Because really, when you think about it, his body was broken and his blood was shed, and all for what? 12 committed disciples, one of whom betrayed him, the rest of whom deserted him in his hour of need. 3 years of hard work for 11 kind of mediocre followers, and this is what it all amounts to? If Jesus would have been too concerned about the fruits of his labor, he probably would have been really depressed. And yet, he trusted. He'd had enough experience of following that flow to know that even when it took him here, he could trust that flow, that there would be great benefit to him and to the world if he simply stayed connected. Perhaps this evening as you partake of the elements and sense that those elements going into your very body and mingling with your very blood, you will sense that connection that you have with the Holy Spirit of the living God, who is communicating with you and seeks relationship just as much with you as it did with Paul and the other disciples. The only difference between us and Paul is that he listened all the more attentively and he trusted where that flow would take him. Where will that flow take you? These are the gifts of God for the people of God. I invite you to partake of the feast. Man. Well, we're glad you could join us this evening at Darkwood Brew and look forward to seeing you again next week when we will have a big announcement, something exciting for Darkwood Brew and potentially for you. And we'll be joined once again by Troy Bronsink, coming to us from Cincinnati, Ohio, and exploring the next step, another step in the creative process. Until we see you next week, my friends, may the Spirit of the living God made known to us most fully in Jesus Christ our Lord go before you to show you the way, go above you to watch over you, go behind you to push you into places you may not necessarily go yourself, but may just push you into the flow of your life. Go beneath you to uphold you and uplift you, go beside you to be your strong companion, and dwell within you to remind you that you are surely not alone and you are loved beyond your wildest imagination. And may the fire of God's blessing burn brightly upon you and within you, now and always. Amen.